Subscribe to The Honest Critique for current affairs, movie, book, and product reviews. Also, make sure you press the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video. The views, information, or opinions expressed during the video series are solely those of the individuals and do not necessarily represent those of The Honest Critique and its employees. The following video contains strong language which may be offensive to some viewers. Viewer discretion advised.
So, hello and welcome to another session of the Security, Intelligence and Terrorism series. Today we have among us Vice Admiral Pradeep Kaushiva, who commanded the Indian naval ships Prachand and Veer, Coast Guard ShipVijaya, and guided missile INS Ganga. His other important afloat assignments include deployments of Fleet Communications and Electronic Warfare Officer, Western Fleet, and Fleet Operations Officer of the Eastern Fleet. Ashore has been Director of Naval Signals and Electronic Warfare and Director Naval Operations at Naval Headquarters. After promotion to the flag rank, he has been Assistant Chief of the Naval Staff of the Information Warfare and Operations, Deputy Commandant and Chief Instructor at National Defense Academy at Khadakwasla, Flag Officer commanding Eastern Fleet and Chief of Staff, Southern Naval Command at Kochi. On promotion to the rank of Vice Admiral, he was appointed Commandant of the Naval Academy, which was then still under construction at Ezhimala, Kerala. He retired after 40 years of naval service as the Commandant of National Defense College and has been recorded by the President with Vishist Seva Medal in 1993 and Uttam Yudh Seva Medal in 1997 for distinguished service of exceptional order. Sir, thank you so much for taking your time and coming on the show, and thank you so much for your service.
Thank you very much, Ratndeep. It is very good of you to have me, and I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you, sir. So before we start, our audience mostly includes university students like us. So we thought of trying to deconstruct the Indian Naval Service and how does the Indian Navy look like. So the questions will be very basic, that's why. So before we start, let's talk about the importance of sea. Why do we need to control the sea? Why do we need security in the sea? And if you could talk about a little bit of history of the Indian Ocean and the Indo-Pacific, and then we can probably go in depth to the Indian Navy.
Yeah, most certainly. So my first comment really is that I wonder if you have heard of it, but it is said that the old people believe everything, the middle-aged suspect everything, and the young know everything. Since the audience of this interview, as you say, is mainly of college and only to them because they know everything. And then I will seek their endorsement for what I'm going to say. Let's start with the importance of the sea in history. The oceans have played a key role in the history of mankind. We all know that water is the source of all life on this earth, and 70% of Earth's surface is covered with water bodies. But many may not know that nearly 90% of the global trade moves over the seas. So, navies have a central role to play in securing the imports, energy supply lines, industrial produce, exports, and therefore the economy as a whole. It is for this reason that it is said that wheels of economies move over the seas. Indian Ocean is the third largest body of water in the world, covering about 20% of the Earth's water surface. With 35 nations, including 6 island nations, sharing an Indian Ocean coastline, some of the world's busiest and most important sea lines of communications pass through these waters. The principal geographical feature of this ocean is, and I'm sure most of you have guessed it right, the Indian Peninsula that juts out prominently into the water body, providing us the unique distinction of being the only country on this earth after which an ocean is named. And conversely, Indian Ocean is the only water body of this size named after a country. This sea space hosts an estimated 40% of the world's offshore oil production, half of the world's containerized cargo, 1/3 of its bulk cargo, and 2/3 of its oil shipments. To its west, Indian Ocean opens into the Atlantic, south of the continent of Africa, as you would know from geography. To the east, it connects with the Pacific Ocean through South China Sea and also north and south of the Australian continent, forming the Indo-Pacific. This expression, Indo-Pacific, that is, refers to the maritime space stretching from littorals of East Africa in the west and West Asia across the Indian Ocean and Western Pacific Ocean to the littorals of East Asia. Indo-Pacific littorals constitute a very complex region whose inhabitants live in extreme diversities of economies, levels of development, political systems, governance structures, socio-economic disparities, ethnicities, religions, and languages. They also share some commonalities, including complex population mix in each of them, ancient cultural roots, Western colonial exploitation, and the ongoing dynamic transformational changes. In the contested, volatile, and uncertain littorals, the tensions are only waiting to play out at sea. The Indo-Pacific as a strategic concept has been gaining traction in recent years. However, it merits recall that the inherent logic and essence of this maritime continuum had been well grasped by the ancient Indian. The Indus Valley civilization had traded with Mesopotamia around 3rd millennium BC. Later, the Tamil Pandyas developed trading contacts with Egypt and Rome and also forged vigorous trade links with China by about the 3rd century AD. By about the Middle Ages, India was the hub center of maritime connectivity, radiating not only mercantile wares far to the west, but also seamlessly adding people, ideas, thoughts, knowledge, religion, societal mores, and civilizational influences farther, much farther to the east. And then the ball was dropped as India developed a continental outlook. Security was the first casualty, prosperity the next, and loss of territory, culture, and the very identity of the world's oldest civilization was the ultimate. It is only now, well into the 21st century, that India is showing signs of resurgent maritime stirrings. The reawakening is not triggered by a strategic eureka moment or by a cataclysmic event, but tweaked by incremental external as well as internal changes. The evolution has so far been in the nature of baby steps, and the time is now at hand to add momentum as we go along. The most striking feature of commercial, cultural, and religious exchanges that took place in the Indo-Pacific region all through the ancient and medieval history was that these were all peaceful. As a direct consequence of the maritime sciences, the maritime sciences advanced, seagoing skills were honed, maritime infrastructure developed, and ancillary industry to support the seagoing activity as per market forces long before this term called market forces came into modern day jargon, as you all use it. The overall maritime development in the region was through an unregulated but collaborative process. By early 2nd millennium AD, however, India apparently was developing sea blindness, which lasted over last 500 years. So after nearly 4,000 years of maritime activity, we have had 600 to 700 years of sea blindness. This was also around the time that Europeans were developing adequate nautical wherewithal to embark upon voyages of discovery as we know them. Commencing With Vasco da Gama's epic landing in Calicut, the Indian Ocean saw a paradigm shift. Competition, rivalries, and conflicts of Europe manifested themselves through the Indo-Pacific region. The race to establish the lead in commerce very rapidly degenerated into battles at sea for primacy in acquisition of resources and in establishment of colonies in Asia and Africa. The resource-rich region had enough to offer to all colonists, and therefore the latter did not take very long to set up their relative boundaries on land. Actually, the mutual accommodation broadly conformed to the winds of change sweeping across Europe since the Peace of Westphalia. So this there is the background to maritime activity and the Indo-Pacific region in general.
Thank you, sir. So now let's come to one of the institutions that you have worked for the last 4 decades, the Indian Navy. If you could tell us a little bit about the Indian Navy, about how it grew over the last few decades, and the maritime dimension of national security. And if you could tell us what is the role of Indian Navy and some of the operations. We have seen a lot of operations that Indian Navy has participated in, whether it's Operation Vijay, Trident, Python, or Cactus. If you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, most certainly. I'll also use some facts and figures. I don't want to anybody to worry about not recalling facts and figures that I mentioned. If they can be recalled, that's fair enough. But otherwise, it is basically to give size and scale of what we are discussing. So when I mention so many of numbers or so many of people or so many of kilometers, etc., just take it as indicative numbers, but precisely if required, that can be done. The Indian Navy, coming to growth and the roles. The first Indian to be granted a commission joined the Royal Indian Marine as an engineer officer in 1928. What is today Indian Navy was called the Royal Indian Marines at that time. In 1934, the Royal Indian Marine was reorganized into the Royal Indian Navy. Now, it had gone on since 1600 till 1934 in different nomenclatures, etc., during the company time, taken over the crown, etc. I'm not covering those dimensions. So I'll just start from what may be called really the 20th century, modern times, and where we have reached now. So it was organized as the Royal Indian Navy in 1934 and presented the King's Color in 1935 to recognize its services. At the outbreak of the Second World War, the Royal Indian Navy consisted of 8 warships. By the end of the war, its strength had risen to 117 combat vessels of different sizes and 30,000 personnel, led mainly by British officers. So the sailors were from India and officers were largely British. All of them had seen actions in various theaters of operations during World War II. On India gaining independence after partition, the Royal Indian Navy had less than 650 officers, 11,000 men, and 32 aging vessels which were suitable only for coastal patrols. This force included 4 sloops, just to give you an idea, 6 minesweepers, a few naval trawlers, and a number of harbor defense motor launches. There were only 9 of Indian commissioned officers in 1947 who had more than 10 years of service. The bulk had 5 to 8 years of service. Therefore, British officers were seconded from British Royal Navy to hold senior Royal Indian Naval shore appointments after independence. But all naval vessels had Indian commanders by year end of 1947. The prefix Royal was dropped on 26 January 1950 when India became a republic. Indian officers progressively assumed senior appointments, even though at very young age. On 22nd April 1958, that is 11 years, 10 and a half years after independence, Vice Admiral Ramdas Katari assumed office as the first Indian chief of the naval staff, and he was all of 47 years of age. Induction of ships and of officers and men in Indian Navy continued apace through the decades of 1950s and 1960s. At the outbreak of Indo-Pakistani War of 1965, the Indian Navy had 1 aircraft carrier, 2 cruisers, 19 destroyers and frigates, and 1 tanker. Of these 23 ships, 10 were under refit. The operational ones that were deployed largely for coastal patrols because very categorical orders had been issued for Indian naval ships not to operate close to the war zone. That was a political decision of that time. By late 1960s, the acquisition of submarines, Osa-class missile boats, and Petya-class corvettes had commenced from Soviet Union. This was to introduce a new dynamic in India's warship acquisition plans. Indian Navy came of age in 1971 when, during the Indo-Pak War, it sank Pakistan Navy ships defending Karachi and set the fuel tanks ashore ablaze. In the Eastern Theater, Pakistan's submarine Ghazi was sunk and aircraft carrier-borne aircraft from Vikrant pounded East Pakistan's coastal defenses to help liberate Bangladesh. Navies do not build up force levels relative to other navies. So we don't bother too much about what Pakistan Navy has got or what Iranian Navy, or for that matter, what Chinese Navy may have. Instead, force levels and capabilities are acquired by navies to deliver their assigned tasks. Indian Navy had long envisaged a balanced mix of large, medium, and small ships with 3 aircraft carriers at its core. This was the vision. 3 aircraft carriers so that 1 operational carrier would be on each coast and the 3rd one would be under maintenance, because carriers take, during the maintenance period, they take long refits. Presently, operational fleet of Indian Navy comprises 1 aircraft carrier, 1 amphibious transport dock, 8 landing ship tanks, 10 destroyers, 13 frigates, 1 nuclear-powered attack submarine, 1 ballistic missile submarine, 15 conventionally powered attack submarines, 23 missile corvettes, 10 offshore patrol vessels, 1 mine countermeasure vessel, 4 fleet tankers, survey ships, and various other auxiliary vessels and small patrol boats. In addition, 43 ships, including 1 aircraft carrier and submarines, are at different stages of construction, 45 of them in Indian shipyards. Acceptance of necessity has been accorded for another 38 ships and 6 submarines. So it would seem that very soon Indian Navy will grow very large in size, but actually that is not quite the fact. That's not the way it's going to happen. Due to long lead time of capital-intensive naval units, the new inductions will not dramatically enhance the force levels, as I said. The net accretion will be slow, as old units will also retire. But capability enhancement will be continuous because of newer technology weapons, sensors, machinery, and equipment. So numbers will increase slowly, but the capabilities will increase substantially. Now let's take a look at the maritime dimension of national security, which will bring us to the role and operations. The maritime dimension is an indivisible subset of the overall national security calculus. Even though security imperatives and entailments on land are distinctly different from those on the high seas, both of these equally impact the waterfront locations, what is called the coastal regions. The seamless continuum from oceanic deeps to the hinterland needs to factor in diverse distinctive features which directly impinge upon operations. I'll illustrate some of these. First is that maritime vehicles operate in 3 dimensions, 2 of which have their own peculiarities. On one hand, the sea surface is a featureless environment that offers no place to hide. The subsurface, on the other hand, provides large room for concealment and stealth. Secondly, Maritime operations seamlessly stretch from the high seas, where all maritime units, irrespective of their origin, have equal freedom of navigation, to coastal waters where national laws apply, and thence onto sovereign land. Thirdly, littoral seas are a very crowded space due to offshore economic activity, coastal trade, and presence of massive numbers of fishing vessels, offshore support vessels, etc. Identification there is a very major challenge. But for a military operation to make a lasting impact anywhere, territory needs to be held by the army. Since the two Wright brothers made one wrong more than a century ago, air power has embedded deep into all security operations. National defense of any country in the 21st century can only be ensured through joint actions of Army, Navy, and the Air Force. Whereas the navies have long reach and endurance, air forces have speed and therefore surprise, and the armies have boots on the ground for physical occupation. Particularly since World War II, therefore, most military operations all over the globe have been jointly undertaken by the nation's defense forces. In all these, there would be a lead service that the others would support, and the leadership role itself may change hands depending upon operational necessities. Now we come to role of the Navy. Specifically, the full range of operations in which a nation's naval forces may be involved is vast, from high-intensity war fighting at one end to humanitarian assistance and disaster relief operations at the other. This broad continuum of operations can be broken down into distinct roles. Each of them demands a specific approach to the conduct of operations. Accordingly, the four main roles envisaged for Indian Navy are as follows. Firstly, the military role. The essence of all navies is their military character. Their role is to ensure that no hostile maritime power degrades own national security and interests. This is achieved through application of maritime power in both offensive operations against enemy force, territory, and trade, and defensive operations to protect own forces, territory, and trade. Some of the examples that you had asked for also. Operation Trident was an offensive operation launched by Indian Navy on Pakistan's port city of Karachi during Indo-Pakistan War in 1971 on the night of 4th, 5th December. It saw the first use of anti-ship missiles in combat in this region, fired by 3 missile boats, which inflicted heavy damage on Pakistani vessels and facilities. In this operation, India suffered no losses, but Pakistan lost a minesweeper, a destroyer, a cargo vessel carrying ammunition, and fuel storage tanks in Karachi that I had referred to earlier. Another destroyer was also badly damaged, and she had to be eventually scrapped. After this first attack, Pakistan stepped up aerial surveillance of its coast, as the presence of large Indian Navy ships of Western Fleet gave the impression that another attack was being planned. Pakistani warships attempted to outsmart the Indian Navy by mingling with merchant shipping. To counter these moves, Operation Python was launched on the night of 8th 9th December 1971. A strike group comprising 1 missile boat and 2 frigates attacked the group of ships off the coast of Karachi. While India suffered no losses, Pakistani fleet tanker PNS Dhaka was damaged beyond repair, and Kemari oil storage facility was lost. 2 other foreign ships stationed in Karachi were also sunk during this attack. So this was the military role of the navies. The diplomatic role. Maritime diplomacy entails the use of naval forces in support of foreign policy objectives. On one hand, it seeks to build bridges of friendship and strengthen international cooperation. And on the other, it signals capability and intent to deter potential adversaries. India's Operation Cactus was a good example when President Gayoom of Maldives sought help against attempted coup by a group of Maldivians assisted by armed mercenaries of a Tamil secessionist organization from Sri Lanka. The coup d'etat was foiled by the Maldivian National Security Service with the help of Indian Army Brigade flown by an Indian Air Force IL-76 aircraft to Hulule Airport and restored the government. At the realization of the attack's failure, the rebel group hijacked Maldivian freighter named MV Progress Light and attempted to escape to Sri Lanka. Indian naval ship Godavari, after being rerouted from her passage, intercepted and captured the mercenaries. Similar are examples of Indian naval ships being deployed in show of force on separate occasions when so requested by duly constituted governments of Mauritius and Seychelles. The bids to overthrow the governments by illegal means were foiled. A failed example of the diplomatic role was when in December 1971, US Navy's 7th Fleet, led by aircraft carrier Enterprise, came to the Bay of Bengal ostensibly to evacuate the Americans stranded in East Pakistan. The unmistakable signal was of military support to Pakistan and a power-packed warning to India. Joint forces of India and Bangladesh, however, foiled the attempt by expeditiously enforcing surrender by the Pakistan Army. The Enterprise Task Group, therefore, had no choice but to withdraw very quietly. Third is the constabulary role. The increasing incidence of maritime crime has brought into sharp focus the constabulary role that navies have to perform. The significance of this role may be gauged from the fact that for a third of the world's navies, this is a major facet of their functioning. In the constabulary role, forces are employed to enforce international law, law of the land, or to implement a regime established by an international mandate. Anti-piracy patrolling in the Gulf of Aden by coalition forces and by other navies, including Indian Navy, is an example of the constabulary role being performed. In another example, the Indian Navy had provided security for the Maputo African Union Summit in 2003 and during the World Economic Forum meeting in 2004 by patrolling the Mozambique Channel. The fourth is the benign role. It is so named because violence has no part to play in its execution, nor is the potential to apply force a necessary prerequisite for undertaking these operations. Examples of benign tasks include humanitarian aid, disaster relief, search and rescue, ordnance disposal, diving assistance, salvage operations, hydrographic surveys, etc. Indian Navy's quick mobilization to provide succor to Indonesia, Sri Lanka, and Maldives in the aftermath of December 2004 tsunami is an example of benign role, and I was ACNS Ops at that time at Naval Headquarters coordinating this entire operation. Parakram was an interesting operation in that the full-scale mobilization for diplomatic pressure to terrorism did not transition into war. I was commanding the Eastern Fleet of Indian Navy at that time and took my operational units ready for combat from Vizag to the Western Theatre. Since 1971, that was the nearest we came to being at war with Pakistan. But very happily, very fortunately for everyone all around, the war did not take place and better sense prevailed across the border and we stood down thereafter. So this was Operation Parakram at the beginning of this decade and century. So this much is for the roles, etc., of the navies, what they do, and what Indian Navy in particular has done in the recent times.
So sir, before we move on to the next question, I have a small follow-up which probably a lot of our viewers might be confused about. There's a slight, there's huge difference between the Indian Coastal Guards and the Indian Navy. At times, we hear that, for example, the Chinese Coastal Guards act as a shadow navy where they misuse their power. We hear it a lot. So when we go to the Indo-Pacific, you might cover that aspect. And since you spoke about Coastal Guards, can you just give us a small difference between the Coastal Guard and the Indian Navy?
Yes, I will. I think before going to the other larger picture of Indo-Pacific, let me cover this part since you asked this question. I'll mention it right away. You see, Indian Navy, as you can see, as from what I have described, actually has a role from the high seas, from the blue waters, on to whatever as you close into the littoral waters in the coastal region. These are called gray hull activities, essentially because traditionally the ship's color schemes were gray or light sky blue, it may be called, or whatever, but these are called gray hull activities. Now, closer inshore, within the territorial waters and within exclusive economic zone, there are a large number of activities which are not so power intensive. They are more in the nature of applying law of the land and safeguarding the national interests, which can be done by lower capability, lower denomination ships and units. So for this reason, in 1977, Indian Coast Guard was constituted after an act of parliament was passed for this organization to come into being. Initially, the Coast Guard was manned by Indian naval officers on secondment, and then they started their own entry, etc. And today, the Coast Guard is headed by a Coast Guard cadre officer who was inducted into that service itself. So there is no longer a head of the Coast Guard service from the Navy on secondment, which was still about 5 years ago. That was the case which was going on. Now that service has come into its full bloom. The functions of Coast Guard are within the exclusive economic zone to look after the nation's interests, in that nobody, no other power or no other interest comes along and hampers our economic well-being, whether it is fisheries, it is search and rescue, it is exploitation of the marine resources on the seabed or below the seabed, etc. And it comes inwards closer till you come to the territorial waters where the law of the land, which is 12 miles from the coast, where the law of the land applies. And Coast Guard functions are to ensure that this is taken care of. And to that extent, it provides waterfront security right till here when the security requirement transitions into shore-based units of marine police and the local police, etc., as you touch ground. So you may see, in a manner of speaking, it is a graduated picture from the blue waters by the Navy coming closer inshore to exclusive economic zone, which may be called the brown waters, and coming to the coastal areas, which is the police force, etc. I'll make a reference to this a little later also in the context of coastal security, but that is a function of Coast Guard. Now that is a separate service altogether now, completely independent of Navy, but operates in very close coordination with the Navy. So we are really hand in glove. And I will make a mention of exactly how it goes on when I cover the coastal security aspect, if that's all right with you. Okay.
Sure, sir. Sure, sir. I'll just move on to the next part then, to what you want to discuss. So the Indo-Pacific region, we have seen there's an increasing geostrategic significance of the Indo-Pacific region. And there's a shift in economic power from the west to the east has resulted in an increasing cooperation as well as competition among various countries in the region. So if you could briefly touch upon why is the region so turbulent right now, and why are every country, whether it's the east or it's the west, behind this region?
Yes. In the latter half of 20th century, there was a smooth transition of maritime primacy in the Indian Ocean and South China Sea. from the United Kingdom to the United States of America. USA had already held sway in the northwestern Pacific since the end of Second World War. But when the British decided to withdraw from east of Suez and west of Hong Kong in the decade 1960s implemented, the US engaged with the region militarily, economically, and diplomatically to become the guarantor of regional maritime stability. Consequently, till about the end of last century, no maritime conflict of any significance developed in the region without US participation, with the possible exception of Indo-Pak War in 1971. So you had one regional hegemon, UK at first, US taken over seamlessly, being alliance partners and having the capability, therefore. To deliver this self-assumed responsibility, the United States maintained overseas military presence in Japan, the Philippines, Singapore, Diego Garcia, Persian Gulf, and elsewhere as required. Arrangements to legally enable such stationing were made through treaties and mutual agreements. After 2 decades of leading and then scaling down military engagements in Iraq and Iran and Afghanistan, and responding to the eastward shift of geostrategic center of gravity led by the economic shift eastwards, US decided to refocus its sights. Unveiled in 2011 as Rebalance and subsequently termed Pivot to the East, this was a grand strategy for the US foreign policy. Stated objective of the new policy was, firstly, to broaden areas of cooperation beneficial to the US with regional states and institutions. Secondly, to strengthen relations with allies and partners. Thirdly, to engage with China, India, Indonesia. And finally, to develop regional norms and rules to support international security, economic, and political order that would be compatible with the global interests of United States as vested in this region. So the states had been there all this while. Undoubtedly responding to the economic and military rise of China, the US initiative was a wide sweep of engagements in the region. Disclaimers notwithstanding, the military dimension constituted the core of the pivot, with reconstitution of the force structure, relocation of military capabilities from other theaters, and restructuring regional security arrangements being all too visible. It wasn't fooling anyone. However, even before all aspects of the US pivot could be implemented, its prime mover, that is United States of America, seemed to lose the drive. I'll come to show as to the reasons for turbulence in this region is the next one, the Belt and Road Initiative. Emerging from the shadows of 1949 revolution, trying to put itself described century of humiliation firmly in the past tense, and looking to be a world leader by the middle of 21st century, China has crawled her way into global reckoning. Funded by nearly double-digit growth rate sustained over 30 years and supported by technology acquisition through transfer, purchase, theft, stealth, everything in the book and a lot beyond the book, China initiated a series of overseas maritime infrastructure development programs to build up pockets of commercial and dual-use facilities from mainland China to east coast of Africa. This was famously described by the consulting firm Booz Allen Hamilton as the string of pearls that many of you may have heard of. In 2013, the string of pearls was subsumed within the newly announced One Belt, One Road initiative, subsequently designated as Belt and Road Initiative, BRI. estimated to be the order of 800 million to 1 trillion US dollars, BRI is the most ambitious international infrastructure development program in history. It seeks to link up global markets, raw material resources, industries through economic corridors, roadways, railways, seaports, hinterland infrastructure, power generation, industrial parks, and their interconnects, covering 68 countries across 3 continents, accounting for nearly 40% of the global GDP. This indicates the size, scale, and the dimensions of the project. China-Pakistan Economic Corridor is the flagship program of the BRI, Belt and Road Initiative. At a revised estimate cost in excess of 60 billion US dollars, CPEC is a basket of multimodal transportation projects connecting Kashgar in Xinjiang Autonomous Region in Western China to Gwadar Port in Balochistan province of Pakistan. The plan envisages upgradation of rail road network, power generation, energy projects, and special economic zones, industrial hubs, oil and gas pipelines, port and inland infrastructure network. The aim is to reduce China's Malacca dilemma and have a direct access from mainland China to Indian Ocean. As a part of bolstering military presence in Indian Ocean, China has established an elaborate base in Djibouti and is all set to establish the second overseas naval base at Gwadar in Pakistan, where several new complexes in a high security compound have already come up. It has acquired Hambantota port in Sri Lanka for 99 years. And also uninhabited islands in Maldives, including Feidhu, Finolhu, and Kalhu Falu Fushi. The ploy is the same for all, and that is to offer infrastructure development assistance at high interest rates, leading to unsustainable debt burdens, which has also been observed and commented upon by the International Monetary Fund. The countries that have fallen into or are at the immediate risk of slipping into the debt trap include Bangladesh, Maldives, Myanmar, Nepal, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. They are all in danger zone. Attractive military hardware sales and transfers provide the rationale for commercial infrastructure to be developed with dual-use adaptability that prices open the route for their upgradation to military facilities for future Chinese use. The third segment in this is South China Sea. Technically a part of the Indian Ocean, significance of South China Sea lies not so much in its sea area per se, or in more than 250 small islands, atolls, cays, rocks, shoals, and sandbars, but in its sheer location. It hosts roughly 1/3 of global oil trade and more than half of global liquefied natural gas trade, which account for 75% of China's oil imports, almost all of Japan's and South Korea's oil imports, and 33% of Japan's and South Korea's LNG imports. Even the economic potential of vast fishing and untapped undersea oil and gas reserves pales in comparison to the strategic significance of China having to compulsorily traverse this water body of South China Sea for access to North Indian Ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, and their littorals. In a list of shifting priorities, Chinese policymakers had from time to time highlighted specific issues of interest or anxiety to them. This list was flexible, but Taiwan had always been a constant in that. Around the turn of the millennium, these came to be identified as core interests. And in 2006, for the first time, Tibet and Xinjiang were added to these. In 2010, South China Sea also made a smooth entry into this list, This was a clear sign that China was adopting a more assertive stance in the South China Sea territorial disputes, and aggressive posturing was soon to follow. In the recent years, China has literally gobbled up South China Sea, even as it stepped up artificial islands and maritime infrastructure development activities. This has also coincided with China taking a more combative stance towards her maritime neighbors. At first, China's official stance had been that it will not militarize the South China Sea. That was part of the peaceful rise. But within a couple of years, space reef and rocks in the Spratly archipelago were reclaimed and converted into large islands. The Fiery Cross Reef, which nature had designed as a few rocks, has been developed into a 665-acre island with a 3-kilometer long runway. Even though the infrastructure development is being projected by the Chinese as civilian necessities, and a few commercial test flights were indeed undertaken, the runway on all counts is suitable for possible use by fighter jets also. A harbor large enough to accommodate military logistics ships is also under construction. Mischief Reef is a 1,700-acre artificial island, another one of the 7 reclaimed by Chinese in the archipelago, on which a landing strip has been constructed. At Subi Reef, the Chinese started reclamation work in 2014 and rapidly developed it into an almost 4-square-kilometer island with a 3-kilometer long airstrip, a military base, and a large harbor. Now, the freedom of navigation issue is firmly joined between China and US-led alliance partners. There has been no skirmish so far, as both sides are testing waters and keep marginally clear of fisticuffs. But it may not be very long before the situation spins out of control due to miscalculation, or could even be on account of deliberate precipitation, actually to test out their schemes. Now I'll come to a related issue of Quad, because people may have heard of that, and that directly is a derivative of this. So Quad is the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, whose first meeting in India's Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, US President Dick Cheney, Australian Prime Minister John Howard, and Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe took place in Manila in May 2007. Conceptualized by Prime Minister Abe as an arc of democracy, the Quad had initially envisioned expanding and including countries in Central Asia, the Korean Peninsula, and in Southeast Asia in due course, as the grouping sought to eventually include virtually all the countries on China's periphery, but not China. The latter was alarmed. Inclusion of Japan, Australia, and Singapore in September 2007 edition of Malabar series of bilateral exercises between Indian Navy and the US Navy ruffled the Chinese feathers further. Viewing this and calling it as a gang-up operation, Beijing issued demarches to New Delhi and Canberra, with India and Australia not wanting to provoke China at that point in time, as also due to policy U-turn by successors of Prime Ministers Abe and Howard. The Quad remained in a limbo till revived a full decade later. In November 2017, Japanese, Indian, Australian, and American officials met to continue security cooperation discussions ahead of the ASEAN and East Asia summits. The meeting included assessment of China's increased prominence in the South China Sea, and the phrase free and open was used for the first time in this context. Quadrilateral met the Quad 5 times during period 2017 and 19. during the Vice Admiral in New Delhi in 2018, the Navy chiefs of Japan, US, Australia, and India came together. This was one of the first indications of the revival of the Quad's security structure. In September 2019, ministers in charge of diplomacy from the 4 member countries were in New York City and held the first ministerial meeting of the reformed Quad, or it was now called Quad 2.0. They discussed collective efforts to advance a free, open, prosperous, and inclusive Indo-Pacific. They also identified some common ground for a framework. On 6th October 2020, the 4 countries held the second ministerial meeting in Tokyo, but no joint statement was issued after the meeting. However, soon thereafter, the Indian Ministry of Defense announced that Australia would join Malabar 2020 naval exercise, consisting of India, Japan, and the United States. It was more than 3 years after Australia had first requested to join her. In November 2020, Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison visited Tokyo, whereafter Australia and Japan agreed in principle to a defense pact that would increase military ties. Since inauguration of President Joe Biden, US and Japan security officials have also discussed the alliance for the first time. On 18 February this year, the third ministerial meeting was held virtually, wherein the 4 member countries agreed to oppose strongly any attempt by China to alter the status quo in the Indo-Pacific region by force, and vowed to work with ASEAN and Europe. It has just been revealed that the 4 countries are working to develop a plan to distribute COVID-19 vaccines to countries in Asia as part of a broader strategy to counter China's influence. From all this, it is quite clear that even as there is complete lack of clarity about exact nature and contours of the Quad, the dialogue is actively exploring multiple layers of strategic cooperation in the Indo-Pacific region, all underpinned by security. So this is the broader picture as obtains in the maritime neighborhood of India, that is the Indo-Pacific region.
Okay, so sir, that summarizes a lot of the complexities and challenges and the importance of the Indo-Pacific region. So let's now come to the Indian Navy's outreach programs, the Milan the program, the naval exercises that happened, the biennial multilateral naval exercise that started in 1995. We've also seen the Indian Ocean Rim Association as well, which is a dynamic intergovernmental organization and with strengthening regional cooperation. And we've also seen over the last few years, the Bay of Bengal initiative has also gained a lot of momentum, whether it's Bangladesh, whether it's the landlocked states of Nepal and Bhutan wants the access. If you also see the Prime Minister of the country has also approached the method for Sagar, that's the security and growth in all the region. And in fact, in 2019, when he went for the East Asia Summit in Bangkok, he spoke about the Indo-Pacific Region Initiative and laid down 7 pillars to ensure safety and security in maritime domain. So if you could tell us about India's approach, and if you could tell us about the Indian Navy's outreach programs as well.
Yes, most certainly. Indian Navy's, you see, first thing we must understand really is that all armed forces of a nation are a part and parcel of the government. And therefore, the government policies contain them, the government policies deploy them, and their primary task is to deliver on the task assigned in furtherance of the government of the day's objectives. And to this extent, navies have a prominent role to play hand in glove with the Ministry of External Affairs. So Indian Navy's maritime outreach is dedicated on generating security influence through cooperative, collaborative, and consensual relations. The concept is spelled out in Indian Navy's Maritime Security Strategy titled Ensuring Secure Seas, where it is stated that one of the key result areas is, and I quote, to contribute to shaping a favorable and positive maritime environment, to enhance security therein, promote security and stability at sea, and enhance cooperation, mutual understanding, and interoperability. Accordingly, India has been actively engaging with her maritime neighbors and other stakeholders to cement maritime security understandings. Even though our regional maritime security framework is far from conceptualization, there are a number of smaller initiatives at different stages of evolution, more in the nature of work in progress. You have referred to some of them. I'll cover them, some of these one by one. I'll start with Milan. Since 1995, Indian Navy has been hosting Milan, which is a biennial gathering of Bay of Bengal rim navies at Port Blair. More than 30 delegates from 16 countries and 11 ships from 8 countries participated in the last Milan, which was held in 2018. The Milan plan for last year had to be cancelled on account of the pandemic. A tabletop exercise focusing on enhancing regional cooperation, combating unlawful activities at sea, and a seminar on the theme In Pursuit of Maritime Good Order, Need for Comprehensive Information Sharing Apparatus was conducted during the harbor phase of this Milan. During the sea phase, participating ships undertook various exercises aimed at harnessing interoperability in a variety of maritime scenarios, including search and rescue and maritime interdiction operations. Exchange of professional experiences, cultural programs, telematches, cooking competitions have grown now to envelop full-fledged seminars, professional interactions, tabletop exercises, etc., in addition to the customary naval recreational activities. The underlying theme has seamlessly metamorphosed from building mutual understanding to developing cooperative mechanisms. IORA. In 1997, the Indian Ocean Rim Association for Regional Cooperation, which was called IOR-ARC, which has since been rechristened as Indian Ocean Rim Association or IORA. It was launched in 1997 in Mauritius as the Littoral Nations Platform for Socio-Economic Cooperation and Other Peaceful Endeavors. In 2011, for the first time, it incorporated maritime security also as a priority subject for mutual consultation. Today, IORA has 20 member states, 7 dialogue partners, and 2 observer nations. IONS. Indian Navy launched a voluntary initiative in 2008, designated Indian Ocean Naval Symposium. IONS to increase maritime cooperation among navies of the littoral states of the Indian Ocean. This is an open and inclusive platform for discussion among chiefs of member nations' navies on regionally relevant maritime issues. In the process, it endeavors to generate a flow of information between naval professionals that would lead to common understanding and possibly cooperative solutions on the way ahead. The IONS presently has 35 member navies, and its chairmanship is in rotation based in different countries from time to time. The trigger, the initiative was Indian navies. Trilateral Maritime Security Agreement. In 2011, India, Sri Lanka, and Maldives launched a trilateral dialogue for maritime security cooperation at the level of national security advisors. During the third meeting hosted by India in 2014, delegations from Mauritius and Seychelles also participated as guest countries, whereas convergence of maritime security interests had brought the three nations together in the first instance, their internal political and economic situations later led to somewhat divergent strategic alignments. Happily, this now seems to be on the mend. In addition to the multilateral maritime engagements mentioned above, India has been actively pursuing bilateral relationships in terms of port visits, joint naval exercises, coordinated patrols, exclusive economic patrols by Indian naval and coast guard ships and aircraft. On account of its own balanced and steady growth, regional capacity building endeavors, and maritime diplomacy, Indian Navy is increasingly being perceived as a net provider of security. But there is no clarity about security against what and under what circumstances. The aspects of competing priority between homeland responsibility and other nations' expectations have been also a gray area. In general, therefore, it could be assessed that India's maritime outreach was well short of delivering on its potential. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's enunciation in March 2015 at Mauritius outlined the policy framework for India as a maritime power. He said, and I quote, "A peaceful and stable maritime environment is critical for the regional and global security. It is also a must to harvest the riches of the oceanic ecosystems. Given the complexity of modern day challenges, the international maritime stability cannot be the preserve of a single nation. It has to be a shared goal and responsibility of all seafaring nations. To this end, navies and maritime agencies of the world need to work together and engineer virtuous cycles of cooperation." Unquote. This then is the policy that now governs India's maritime outreach programs.
I think 12 years after the gruesome attack on Mumbai, and it's that's 2611. And while coastal border management was institutionalized in 2004 with the establishment of the Department of Border Management in the Ministry of Home Affairs, the management of coastal and maritime security in India underwent a paradigm shift out of 2611 attacks. So if you could cover broadly the coastal security, what coastal security is all about, and how does coastal security and management look like 12 years after 2611?
Okay, so before I come to the arrangement today, I must give you a flavor of what coastal security is really all about. As to what is the requirement of coastal security? Why is it needed? It is needed because sea-based threats can develop via surface, subsurface, or an airborne platform. In all three dimensions, they come from seaward. Therefore, a typical security perimeter consists of a surveillance zone wherein you look out for and you expect to pick up targets for detection, tracking, and identification. These capabilities would be embarked on airborne or surface units. Based on intelligence updates, the surveillance effort can be intensified, can also be reorientated, or redeployed elsewhere as required. That's the intelligence that comes into it. Even perception and neutralization of a developing coastal security threat could take place anywhere. The highest probability of this is in the area from about 50 kilometers out at sea to 5 kilometers inland, because that is where the threat would actually be converging. Out in the ocean, into the blue water areas, it could well be dispersed, and it becomes a different situation altogether to pick up and neutralize those targets. But as they come closer inshore, say 50 kilometers inwards, then it is easier to pick them up, and therefore the threat is the largest. A developing coastal security threat could be detected anywhere, but the best shot at its interception and neutralization is between 50 kilometers out at sea to 5 kilometers on land. The governance and administrative rules that apply across this stretch, they range from international law out at sea to municipal laws on land, physically on the ground, terra firma. And these go through central and state government enactments, implementation agencies that exercise overlapping jurisdictions over this stretch. They range from Coast Guard to Marine Police, Directorate General of Shipping, Directorate of Fisheries, Customs Marine Wing, Immigration, Port Control Authority, Municipal Authority, State Police, etc. In addition to many central and state government intelligence agencies, starting from seaward as it does, the Navy's central and lead role is obvious. It is self-evident. But closer inshore, the lead role transitions to other agencies as they come to the fore with their own defined charter of duties. What remains constant, however, in all this is the need for continuous exchange of target information. That is the most important thing. Since 90% of the global trade is carried over the sea, as I had mentioned, it passes through the ports whose own security needs to be ensured. Admittedly, the trade merchandise is in liquid and gas forms, but also it is in solid form that constitutes the bulk. This bulk, almost in its entirety, is transported worldwide and not just port to port. It is well inland too, in some 12 million containers. Each container gets handled sequentially by the exporter, freight forwarder, customs agent, excise inspector, trucker, railwayman, dock worker, and the ship's crew. Upon arrival, it gets handled by a similar sequence, albeit in reverse order, till it is delivered to the importer. On the one hand, each stage of handling the container presents a potential vulnerability for the security and integrity of its cargo, and on the other, costs of inspection and delays on account of inspection are enormous. The container therefore comes out as a convenient and cost-effective of smuggling drugs, illicit arms, ammunition, explosives, weapons of mass destruction, dirty bomb, as well as terror operators. Now, this is where the entire focus of it all needs to be. It is self-evident that no one agency can have its core competence or legal jurisdiction across the entire domain which has just been described. The preventive as well as response mechanisms would therefore consist of a fixed coordinating agency and a number of lead agencies that would change as the counter-terror operations progress. Now, post-2611, National Committee on Strengthening Maritime and Coastal Security, called MCS, under the chairmanship of Cabinet Secretary, monitors progress in respect of coastal security initiatives, shortfalls, issues encountered, and decides on measures to plug the gaps. The committee meets at least twice a year. At the working level, the Steering Committee for Review of Coastal Security under MHA also monitors the progress of various initiatives, especially those pertaining to measures related to MHA and coastal states. The Raksha Mantri also holds periodic meetings to review the coastal security measures. In addition, state level and district level committees under the chairpersonship of Chief Secretary and district magistrates have also been set up. Indian Navy has been entrusted with the following responsibilities. A, the Navy has been designated as the authority responsible for overall maritime security, which includes coastal security and offshore security. B, all naval commanders-in-chief have been designated as CNCs of the coastal defense. Now, the infrastructure. 4 joint operations centers have been set up at Mumbai, Cochin, Visakhapatnam, and Port Blair. These Joint Operation Centers or JOCs are manned by the Navy Guard personnel, and they are round the clock by other stakeholders also during operations and exercises. A National Command, Control, Communications and Intelligence Network called NC3IA, incorporating 51 Navy and Coast Guard stations along the coast, has been established. Coastal static networks feed from remote operational centers of Coast Guard, and data inputs from national automatic identification systems, long-range identification and tracking, space-based AIS, etc., World Register of Shipping, and VTMS are all fused at Information Management and Analysis Center, IMAC, at Kurgaon, the NCR. This fused information is fed to all 51 coastal stations on a round-the-clock basis. This is how coastal security situations are monitored to by agencies.
Okay, so that summarizes the coastal.
In this, I'm not covering the coast levels.
Yeah, so this covered the coastal
Sorry.
security, a huge extent, sir. And I think that summarizes the topics that we were supposed to discuss. So before we end this conversation, I just wanted to ask you, there are a lot of young students like me who wanted to join the armed force, not only in the not only in the Navy, but maybe the Air Force or the Army. If you have something to say to the young people out there.
Yes, absolutely. First thing I would say is most welcome. Indian Navy looks for youths, motivated youths, boys and girls, at different levels, in different capacities for different tasks. Details of all these are available on websites, which since all of you are today in this time and age are computer savvy, all you have to do is punch in or do a Google search for Indian Navy. You will get an official website of the Navy, on which it is also, there is a click which you can do on how to join the service, and that is possible. So I will leave that part of it alone as to how to apply and how to go along. I would put the larger picture into it. You see, the nation's youth, as they grow, as they come of age, towards conclusion of their schooling, class 12, etc., and towards going for higher studies, shape in their own minds some sort of a picture as to what they would like to do. Undoubtedly, in this time and age, that is also governed to quite an extent, not only by what you want to do, but also you are able to do in actual fact, the availability and options and the competitions and so on. So one thing is constant in entire process of schooling, post-school, college, and conclusion of formal academic education, and that is growth of a person as a responsible citizen of a nation. Responsible citizen of a nation owes it to himself and herself to be not only academically up and about, also intellectually up and about, also morally up and about, is constant with all human beings. And I'm only putting it together that these are also factors which facilitate entry into different services. Now, armed forces undoubtedly require not only highest level of motivation, but also a very high degree of physical fitness. Ordinary, a normal average Indian would, under normal circumstances, be able to pass clear all for entry. What depends is the motivation factor. What depends is the willingness to get more fit where there is some weakness observed. So that is the part about that. Insofar as motivation is concerned, that takes care of every other facet in lacking. That is to say, if there is some academic qualification which is not there, somebody who's motivated enough would be able to cover that, because it is within the intellectual average student. somebody who's inadequately lacking in medical types, that means a temporary unfitness, that could be catered for, and that could be made good as you go along. So the moral factor, the willingness factor, the motivation factor is really the most important driver. And if you don't mind, I can give a personal example of my own. It's not very courteous thing to do, but since you asked for it, let me just give you. By about class 7, way back in 1950s, I had decided what I wanted to be. There were only 2 of us in that class who had decided what they were going to grow up and do. I had decided to join the Air Force. The other fellow who had decided to join the IAS. Now, my entire focus thereafter was on joining the Air Force. I joined National Defense Academy in 1963 for Air Force. I ensured prior to that, only because I had wanted to, I ensured that I was generally fit. I did not belong to any outstanding club of fitness freaks and motivation of that kind. It was just an average person who would keep himself, in the normal running about, etc., and fit for that age. That is about all. Of course, kept myself well informed about general knowledge events and current events and whatever is the going on academically and otherwise. You need to be at a certain level of academic merit. There's no doubt in that. I joined the academy for Air Force. For my own personal reasons, I had to change service, which I voluntarily did, applied for, got changed to Navy. Now the focus got shifted. It was Air Force at one stage, which was driving me. Now it became the Navy. So you join the Navy and you go along. And after you join the Navy, you go through different stages of training and keep doing the various courses and the entire process you go into. The only factor which remains constant is your motivation. Motivation to do well. Motivation to get on and do whatever is necessary to achieve your objectives. That is to be the utmost main driver. Because please remember, armed forces of the nation, defense are different from any other service only in one respect, amongst some others, but in main prime respect. And that is, they need to deliver results irrespective of any other consideration. That is to say, if I have to of sinking a ship or taking a post from enemy at the heights of Siachen, or shooting down very sophisticated high technology aircraft of an enemy in respective service, we have to do that irrespective of what the constraints might be. And that is why you are trained to do that. Now, this is the objective of focus of all your attentions and endeavors. If you are driven by this kind of a passion, because in this, there will be some successes, there'll be a few failures, there will be a few asides, but you have to go along and continue keeping up your morale and your motivation factor. Every officer who joins armed forces is a leader from the word he joins up. The moment you join, there is always somebody behind you. Somebody is always looking up to you as to what you're doing. Somebody is always taking inspiration from you. Somebody is also, therefore, looking for your weaknesses to see if that is not a shortcut. Now you have to be conscious and be able to do that. So self-motivation is a very important factor. And as long as one does that, just about anything can be achieved in life.
Thank you, sir. That's
I wish all your colleagues, I wish all your colleagues and everybody else, whoever may be watching this, all the very best in your endeavors, and may you succeed. And also do keep it in mind, this is not end all and be all. You try to achieve something, if for some reason you cannot, like I could not join Air Force, so I didn't. Get on and do something else, whatever is the next best you're doing. But the factor is you have to be motivated enough to put in your very best at all times. That is a constant. That must so remain. And in that, you have to be a good citizen. You have to be morally straight. You have to be physically fit. mentally strong,
Yeah.
and morally straight.
Yeah.
Self-training, self-motivation is the main driver, and you can achieve anything.
Saying that this summarizes a lot of motivation that the youth needs today.
Very good. Delighted to be a part of this conversation. And if a few young boys and girls to think of armed forces as a career, of Navy as a career, excellent. And for the rest, as long as it gives you basic information about the Navy, what the Navies do, the situation around us, the maritime situation, I think you have to have well served my objective and purpose. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you
so
for
much
having me over.
Thank you so much for taking your time and being on the show. It was an absolute honor to host you, and thank you once again for your service. Jai Hind, sir.
Jai Hind.